In the name of the creating, redeeming, and sustaining God, for whose coming we prepare a place in our hearts.
Amen.
So let's say it's about 40,000 years ago, and it's dark and it's cold, and we're gathered around the light and warmth of our fire with our little tribe. Those are people just like us, and our very safety, our survival, may depend on recognizing those others out there and protecting ourselves from them. Because they might kill us for our food, they might kill our young, they might want our warm clothing, or they may just kill us because they don't know what we are, and they don't know what harm we might intend for them. You have to be either the diner or the dinner in our world. And if we don't hurt them first, they may hurt us. If we don't invade them and enslave them, they may enslave us. Millions of years later, we still seem to divide the world into us, within the warmth and light of our fire, and them, out in the dark and probably up to no good. Our ancestors who thought that way were the ones who won the wars and who lived and had more children, who also thought that way. Though over the millennia we have learned to cooperate. Psychological tests with babies as young as 6 months old indicate that we may be hardwired to give preferential treatment to people we perceive as being just like us, and to fear those we perceive as the other. And if we have learned nothing from history, including the news accounts in the last few weeks, we have learned that we have an endless capacity to justify our own actions. We sometimes use our justifications, our words, as perversions of the word. Sometimes we make up the things that justify our separating ourselves from the others. Now, even before we gathered around that fire, even before those early humans had climbed down from the trees and tamed the fire, there was the beginning that is accounted for in John's Gospel. The Gospel we always read on Christmas Day. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Today's reading from John portrays another group of representatives of the establishment, those inside the Beltway, Jewish collaborateurs in occupied Palestine, who came out to arrest that wacky character John for baptizing without a permit. They tried to force him to tell them just who in the heck he thought he was. But mostly, he told them who he wasn't. He was not the light, but he had come to bear witness to the light. At the beginning of John's Gospel, we learned that the Word became flesh, and this is what the Aramaic says, and pitched his tent among us. The author of the Gospel, John, not the clearly demented religious nut homeless guy that we're reading about today, is reminding us of the story of the Exodus, when God accompanied the children of Israel as they journeyed through the wilderness to the Promised Land. And God pitched a tent with them, stayed with them at the tent of meeting at the edge of the camp. Advent is a time of journeying inward to the very essence of this light, to which John the unauthorized baptizer bears witness. More than any other season, it's when we contemplate equally the human and the divine nature of God. And this journey causes us also to contemplate our own human nature, our own spark of the divine, and the ways that we share that divine gift with all whom God has made. You remember a few months ago, Paul gave all the children at the children's sermon $1. And then those children who were adventurous and secure enough to exchange that dollar for an unknown envelope, found that they had $10 that they could use any way they chose to do something good for someone else. And we got really good stories about what they decided to do with the money. Now we're going to do something that's a bit harder. As we prepare for the advent of the Lord, we're going to go on a mission trip, on a journey inside our own souls. And those who feel adventurous and secure enough will have a chance to write about it, even if they write only one sentence. We'll use today's lesson from Isaiah as a roadmap on this journey, but the roadmap may not be easy to read because we're going to try to look at it through the eyes of the other. How can we bring good news to people oppressed by poverty? How can we comfort families who mourn their dead children? How can we give garlands instead of ashes to police officers who risk their lives every day to make us feel secure and safe so we can exercise our First Amendment rights to protest? How can we be part of repairing ruined cities, what Isaiah calls the devastations of many generations? I told you about those experiments at Yale in which even young babies displayed aversion to puppets that they perceived as being not like them. The lead psychologist on that project says the results, which have been consistent over 20 years, made her heart a bit sad. But there is a neuropsychologist in Amsterdam whose work gives me a bit of hope in that area. Specific areas of the brain will light up on a PET scan when people experience pain. We've known that for a long while. But the new work shows that when we observe others being injured, the same areas of our brain are activated. We can literally feel each other's pain. And we can start by trying to understand their experience. Any parents out there? Okay? If I were to ask you, what's the worst thing you can imagine? I don't have to wait 2 seconds and wonder what you thought. 110% of you thought some variation of harm to my child. When my children would drive off to college, or even now when they drive home after visiting, I have a habit of watching their cars until they disappear all the way down the street and around the corner. I don't know why I do that. Superstition, maybe. But I have never once had to worry that my son would be pulled over or harmed for driving while being a middle-class white guy. And yet, that is a gut-wrenching fear for mothers of color. Can you imagine? I had no idea. I just didn't take it in until I heard a woman interviewed on television in tears, because that's the fear she faces every day. And the only time a salesperson ever follows me around a store is when they're trying to show me something in a different color, or they want me to spend more of the money they assume I have because of how I look, even if I've just walked in there wearing what I was wearing when I was stripping wallpaper. I have never had to put my own beloved child alone on a train or into the hands of a stranger, as Jewish parents did during the Holocaust, or as Central American parents do today when those children's lives are specifically threatened by gang violence. Now, fearing the other or lacking knowledge of their experience does not mean we are bad people. That other out there could have been a saber-toothed tiger. It's how we kept alive. But now it's time to save ourselves by overcoming that reaction. And part of our Advent journey must be to bear witness to the divine light that's reflected in every life, to learn how every life matters. So here's the deal. In whatever way seems right to you, we're going to learn something about the experience of someone whose journey has been very different from your own. Maybe someone whose concerns you just don't understand. And then write one small reflection on what you've learned. It can be just one sentence. And you can put it in the envelopes here that will be waiting for you at the back of the church in the narthex. And mail it back to this empathy project at St. Mark's. I promise I'll assemble whatever responses we get and put them into an article for the epistle. Now, here's one idea if nothing else occurs to you. Many of us of a certain age remember seeing on television, on the evening news, the 1963 Civil Rights March on Washington that culminated with Dr. Martin Luther King's iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. Don't worry, versions are plentiful on YouTube. You can watch it. Now, do so. Don't just read the speech, but watch the experience and look at the people in the crowd. It was the largest that had ever assembled in the United States up until that date. Listen to the speeches. Notice the hope. One memorable part of that event for me was when Peter, Paul, and Mary, ask your parents who that is, sang "Blowing in the Wind," a Bob Dylan song that includes these questions. How many years must a mountain exist before it's washed to the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? And how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? Now, we can't go with easy answers here in our mail-in. That march took place 51 years ago last August. And we've made much progress since then in many areas. But where are we with answering those questions? With realizing that hope, with proclaiming the acceptable year of the Lord that Isaiah mentions, and that Leviticus tells us needs to occur every 50 years. The point in today's protests throughout the nation, by all races, is not about facts put before juries or captured on videotapes. It's about a climate of fear and misunderstanding. It's about a conversation interrupted or never begun. And until each of us makes room around our fire of light and warmth for the other, the fear will persist and the reign of God cannot begin. Isaiah talks today about salvation and mission. But mission is not something we do. It is something that describes who we are. And what mission are we being called to? What are we being saved from? To answer that question, we had to know the same thing John had to know. We have to know who we are and who we're not. And most importantly, we need to identify what we all have in common. Now, this is joyful Gaudete Sunday. And I promise, when we have refreshments, you get cookies and a wonderful dance video. So don't miss that. But usually in our tradition, we carefully and joyfully respect Advent as a season of waiting. We do not trim these little trees quite yet. We do not yet sing "Joy to the World." However, to increase the joy in our world, we take this time to follow John's example of making straight the way of the Lord in our own lives. And that making straight translates into clearing out the clutter that stands on the path between us and God. Each of us can identify our own clutter. It might be in our basement or in our unexamined preconceptions. But a small way to start is to prayerfully and respectfully learn more about the concerns of those who gather at other fires.